Hello everybody. So, this is an unedited, off-the-cuff video about HIMS because, as everyone knows, it's my largest holding and a lot has happened on the company this week. So, I thought it prudent, given the analysis I've made about this business in the past, to give you a raw combination of my thoughts at present to discuss all of the recent news. So, let's just talk about what happened. There was so much that happened last week. I'm sure everyone is burning to hear the thoughts of various YouTubers and researchers that are invested in HIMS and that comment about it recently. And here is my own. So, amongst other things, on Thursday, HIMS announced access to the $49 per month compounded semaglutide pill as a cheaper alternative to Wegovy, which is manufactured by Novo Nordisk. And Novo Nordisk immediately pursued legal action later in the day, arguing that this was illegal mass compounding of a patented drug. Then the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, publicly stated on Friday afternoon or evening, if you're based in Europe, that it would take action against the mass compounding of GLP-1 drugs, citing safety concerns, quality issues, and potential violations of federal law. And then on Saturday, from HIMS and Hers Communications on X.com, HIMS has voluntarily stopped offering the product. So there is going to be no more $49 a month oral compounded semaglutide pill. They said, since launching compounded semaglutide on our platform, we've had constructive conversations with stakeholders across the industry. That's interesting. What could that mean? As a result, we have decided to stop offering access to this treatment. We remain committed to millions of Americans who depend on us for access to safe, affordable, personalized care. At the close on Friday, HIMS was down to $19 per share in the post-market. Absolutely insane stuff. First things first, I want to bring back to basics exactly what happened here, right? So, those three core pillars that I mentioned about HIMS as a company stands. And something like this does not destroy HIMS as a company in any realm. And actually, when zooming out and looking at the long term, I was quite happy and more relieved that HIMS decided to step back from this compounded oral solution on Saturday, because they've effectively poked the bear. From the one side, HIMS, at least at the time, is taking advantage of a personalized compounding law, which is very, very loose, but it's designed for personalized doses. And originally, HIMS was being able to utilize this because there was a shortage in both semaglutide and tirzepatide, and obviously HIMS was selling the compounded version of the former in their pharmacy. Now, you go back to 2023, and they said that they're going to reach their original 1.2 billion guidance 1 year early. So before the FY23 result, their plan was to announce or to deliver 1.2 billion in full year guidance for FY25. And we're coming up to FY25. Obviously, the calendar year has ended, the revenue numbers are in, and we will find out what HIMS are reporting in 2 weeks' time. And I'm sure that this is probably one of the most anticipated quarters ever, not just for HIMS stock, but any company most of us have ever invested in ever, because there is so much going on and there is a lot of questions. But just remember for a moment, this full year was originally meant to be 1.2 billion. And I will just state that obviously without the GLP-1s, well, without any weight loss revenue at all, which is expected to be 725 million, they would have still generated 1.625 billion. So they've done very well with GLP-1 and regardless, and without GLP-1 as well. But regardless of all of that, let's go back. Obviously, HIMS spotted an opportunity with weight loss and then spotted another opportunity with compounding, because these drugs came to market, these peptides were revolutionary, but because there was a shortage, HIMS was able to utilize their compounding facilities in order to offer these drugs at a fraction of what they would cost the end customer in the legacy healthcare industry. And they did extremely well doing that. And now this may cease. And this is one of the legitimate risks. So firstly, what I mean on that point is what we've had here is we've had a situation where everything's gone very well for HIMS in the core. And we saw a situation where, they decided they could make some extra money from GLP-1 and provide a treatment that otherwise the average member of the public wouldn't have been able to afford. So it opened up a whole new income demographic to be able to afford this treatment through HIMS. And they did very well from it. Now, of course, the main risk from all of this, so they made in total 700 million, 800 million extra from compounded GLP-1. Fantastic. That is including let me just get it up. So they said probably 200 million of GLP-1 revenue in 2024. And I'm assuming that I've got two calculations here, either all of the weight loss revenue was GLP-1 or only 100 million of the 725 million was non-GLP-1. It could be more, it could be less. HIMS have been selling generic liraglutide since April of 2025 amongst other treatments, but I think we all know that it is majority GLP-1. So it is, at least in the short term, a large amount of revenue. Now, the risk with this is what I can interpret from HIM's statement is that now they're going to redact or cancel the treatment offering for this oral pill at $49 a month. But obviously the key risk is that they may have poked the bear hard enough, because the statement from the FDA says crack down on mass compounding of GLP-1s. So is that going to mean that HIMS is not going to be able to compound GLP-1s at all? Not necessarily, but using a mass compounding law when there's not a significant medical reason to do so, i.e. if a patient is allergic to a particular ingredient or a patient actually really needs a non-standard dose because of other medical conditions they've got, HIMS will probably not be able to facilitate that. So they may have shot themselves in the foot in that context. It's interesting because obviously they have a very senior past executive from Novo Nordisk on the board. I don't know what his advice would have been on whether they would sue or not. But this is the other thing. We also don't know. Like HIMS has said, we have had active conversations with stakeholders across the industry. That's interesting. And that may not mean, or it probably doesn't mean, that they're partnering with Novo or Lilly, because HIMS has massively ruffled their feathers and pissed them off, to be blunt. But Novo has threatened to sue HIMS before, and none of that ever materialized. And in the Q3 2025 earnings call, HIMS and Novo said, HIMS said that they were in some early talks with Novo. So could they have joined forces? Maybe. Could have Kerry Schultes negotiated something? Maybe. Or is it that HIMS have shot himself in the foot by aggravating Novo? So a deal may be unlikely, but I'm still trying to work out exactly what this statement means. But obviously the risk could be HIMS takes this $49 per pill compounded semaglutide off the market and eventually finds itself in hot water when it comes to compounding semaglutide, compounding GLP-1s on mass scale. That could be where it really hurts. And further from that, I don't know how this affects the peptide market either, because there are a lot of peptides that are off patent. And we're going to see big deregulation in the peptide market over the next couple of years. However, a lot of the really big innovative peptides that everybody's talking about, a lot of them are on patent. So it'd be very interesting to see how this is going to work. And if HIMS may have shot itself further with the FDA going after mass compounded peptides, or to what extent Novo was very pushy towards the FDA doing this, and to what extent the FDA will take action on themselves, because it's a big and broad loophole that's being used here. However, the good news is with peptides more broadly, because there are so many of them, and HIMS does have compounding pharmacies, and obviously the FDA statement has gone after GLP-1s specifically, it may be that HIMS is okay on this front, and it could be as well, because peptides are new, peptides are expensive, and peptides are highly customizable, that there is more of a case for HIMS to be able to compound those peptides because of the degree to which people personalize them. There are a lot of peptides on the market, all used for very different things. And it's very important that HIMS is now synergizing this with blood work. So those are the negatives. This may mean, as I said, HIMS has taken off this $49 a month pill. But it could mean that it's completely screwed HIMS compounding loophole, personalized loophole for semaglutide. And that is significant, because let's go to the numbers, and then I'm going to talk a bit more positively and a bit more broadly. It is significant because it does make up a wide portion of revenue. You know, we can assume that most of that 725 million out of the midpoint of guidance, which is 2350 million, that's 30% coming from weight loss, the majority of that 30% coming from GLP-1. So, but the flip side of that is, if we assume that every penny came from GLP-1, every single penny, because we're potentially talking about this whole segment that HIMS could shut down. Again, that's not exactly what the statement says, and the statement could be very positive. There is a chance that it is positive, and actually somehow HIMS and Novo have done a deal. But given that Novo have just said they're going to sue, that is not something that you want to bet on. So the difference between those two numbers, 2350 and 725, is 1625. I'm going to do it all in millions just because it's easier. 1625 million. Now, in 2024, they concluded that their non-GLP-1 revenue was just over 1.2 billion. Which is great, because that was their initial guidance, and then they hiked the guidance throughout the year in 2024 as GLP-1s came onto their platform. I think that was in May. So if we assume every penny was GLP-1 growth, and if we assume 1.21 billion for core, because they said just over, so 1.21 billion, that's 34% revenue growth. And if they made 100 million from, say, liraglutide and other solutions that are not GLP-1 or not semaglutide, yeah, but this is the thing, is that it's probably all of it, isn't it? The thing is about liraglutide, though, the reason why I've put that separately is liraglutide is off patent and generic. So there's nothing the FDA can do. They're not changing the compounding law, they're changing the compounding law in the context of patent, and liraglutide is off patent. So if we say they maybe made 100 million from non-GLP-1, and I don't think it would be more than that, the difference is then 1725, which would be 43% revenue growth. So I think, you know, their revenue growth is probably somewhere in the mid-30s, excluding GLP-1, which is really good. I mean, 60% nearly, including GLP-1. Now, this is the key thing when we come to HIMS going forward. And as I said, it's an extremely anticipated earnings call. If they do have that headwind of his 600 million annual from GLP-1 that we wouldn't be able to sell, that is a big headwind temporarily. This isn't a GLP-1 company. but analysts taking it quarter by quarter concede that yes, it is significant. So let's say it's 1725, right? If they guide for another 30 to 40% revenue growth, because that's what they did excluding GLP-1 roughly, and you can have some degree of confidence in that because of all of the really amazing things that they're working on that are not going to be affected by what the FDA said at all. I'm just going to check my camera is working. I know this is unedited, but yeah, my camera is working. Fantastic. So, let's say they were able to do another 30, 40%, because remember, these are huge categories: menopause, testosterone, labs, cancer screening through Grail and Galleri, international expansion. There are a lot of verticals going on that are not going to be affected by compounding loopholes to get past patent law. There really, really are. But then the risk is that if we take this 1725 and then we do 30 to 40% growth on that, you're getting somewhere between 2.25 and 2.4 billion of revenue predicted for next year, revenue forecast for next year. So that's if they grow their organic 30, 40% and assume they're going to make zero from GLP-1, absolute zero. Then, of course, the growth year on year is going to be flat, or at least the forecasted growth year on year is going to be flat. And HIMS will probably give relatively conservative guidance because there are so many things that could affect that guidance. And they've just done this huge Super Bowl ad. In fact, the Super Bowl will be on shortly. And they want to gauge the numbers for how popular labs are going to be before they forecast it. So they might give low guidance or they might give a wide range of guidance. And I think that could spook the market in the Q4. But of course, all of this guidance, let's take that midpoint of 2.3 times guidance, is only going to be 2 and change times sales, which is crazy. And this is the whole point, is that the company is just going through a transitionary period. I think the market got very used to HIMS growth, but when you're already at 4 figures in millions, so billions of revenue annually, it's extremely difficult to keep growing at that rate. And HIMS are doing a phenomenal job of actually deploying new business lines at an unprecedented rate, a really unprecedented rate. If they had pivoted hard to GLP-1 and done nothing else, yes, I would be worried as a shareholder. If they were at $70 a share, I would be trimming here, but they're not. And they've got caught up in a huge macro crash as well. A huge macro crash that has pulled these things down further. This cancer diagnostic announcement that I thought was amazing. I knew that Dudum had a partnership with Grail, and there's a really, really good interview from November 2025. I think it was the last mainstream interview he did, and it was with TBPN on the 13th of November. Go to 2 hours 7, and he was talking that HIMS had invested in Grail, and now they've got a partnership with Grail and the Galleri technology. But I thought that was amazing, and it just completely went through as noise. Well, HIMS was up pre-market a little bit, and it completely went through as noise because of the huge SaaS crash, and because HIMS is a fast growth stock, it gets caught up with that. But different from SaaS and different from slow compounding ARR and switching costs, HIMS is just not in that category right now because we're having a pivotal shift. So for it to be quantitatively smooth quarter after quarter, it's just not going to happen because this GLP-1 thing could have never happened in the first place. But HIMS saw an opportunity in 2024. They did it. They made 700, 800 million out of it in revenue at probably 60% gross margin. So they made a whole load of money, and that's allowed them to make more acquisitions and expand their platform further. And they clearly know that it's a good pivot away from it because in the Q3 of 2025, what did they do? They barely mentioned GLP-1. And there was probably a lot that they wanted to say because they had this labs and they had this micro needle around the corner and they had this big partnership with Gray around the corner. But they did really, really well from staying away from GLP-1 and talking about, we want to do longevity and it's absolutely nuts. The amount of healthcare that people actually sign up for that they wouldn't have needed if they'd have done more preventative healthcare in the first place. So I really, really like Dudham's message on that. I know people that have had ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, and with a simple test from Galeri, that could have been prevented. I was looking at the stats, and of course, this does not catch everything. The false positive is quite low, which is great, but the false negative can be a little bit high. However, it does detect the majority of the time, at least from what I've read, these types of cancers that are very discreet and are asymptomatic until often stage 3, which is awful because by the time they get to stage 3, you haven't got a good chance of living. And particularly ovarian cancer, which is also prevalent amongst younger females quite a lot. That's an awful thing to happen. So I'm very, very, very bullish on the way that HIMS is doing this. And what Dudham stated in that interview that I've just talked about is he stated that he said, oh, Yemi will kill me if I say this, but I want to get the price lower and lower and lower and lower because number one, it's an advantage for our customers and it's a great way to onboard new customers. And I think that's why the focus of the Super Bowl advert was on this preventative care. Of course, it's this big new category. And they touched on testosterone and they even had a cancer detection in there as well. But it's a very, very good way to onboard new customers. But also, as I mentioned, their data advantage, their AI advantage that this will eventually translate to is extremely, extremely high. So on the one hand, I guess the one big risk is, okay, let's say, for example, that eventually HIMS says we cannot GLP-1 compound anymore at all. Because from what I interpret in that statement, they're still going to compound injectable semaglutide, which Novo and Lilly have tolerated. Of course, that was a risk, and then Novo fired back, and HIMS said, okay, we're not going to do the pill anymore. But yeah, let's say if they can't do the injectable weight loss, that could be a bit of a bummer. But also, injectable weight loss is not the end goal for HIMS, because taking an injection to lose weight isn't the be all and end all. You know, by the time you're overweight, you've probably started to do a lot of long-term damage, and there are more efficient ways to keep yourself healthy than actually cutting on weight loss. So that would be a bummer completely. What could be concerning and why I'm happy that HIMS stepped down is if this language that the FDA are using then moves into the broader peptide space, and HIMS are also not allowed to compound on that. The good news is that the testosterone treatments are very generic. Of course, vitamins are vitamins, right? Deficiencies are deficiencies. Preventative blood work is preventative blood work, and menopause is menopause. International expansion is international expansion. And their existing categories are largely, well, almost all generic as well. So they still have a huge thriving business, a massive business where they can add significant value per customer. But it would just be interesting to see to what extent 1, 2, or 3 oral semaglutide compounded, all compounded GLP-1, including injectables, or if that moves into the broader peptide space, because most peptides are on patent. Most of the really innovative ones that are commercially valuable are on patent. But that's not to say that still there will be a heavier degree of personalization among peptides more broadly. So HIMS could still facilitate that. And remember, they have the 503As and the 503Bs. So the long-term business is not just going to be about compounding. And I think that they've realized that now. Maybe they wanted to poke the bear a bit before they started thinking about mass compounding peptides. And as I said, if we were at $70 a share and HIMS had done nothing other than double down on weight loss, I would be worried. But any company that tries to take on a Goliath is going to face some backlash. And HIMS did what they did, and they tested it. And they're going to have to answer as to why they did that in the earnings call. But the fact that they have now pulled this $49 Wegovy pill off, it means that they could still be able to compound GLP-1s. If they can't compound GLP-1s, then anyone who's a HIMS shareholder is just going to have to understand this company is working on some extremely amazing things, and the picture could look messy for short-term guidance, as it often does. HIMS are not in this for a cash grab. If they were in this for a cash grab, they could double down and sell compounded semaglutide and the oral solution all day until they get completely shut down by the FDA, or just fined and sued by Novo and all these Goliaths bearing down on them, and that's it, they're gone. But they haven't chosen to do that, and I actually think long term that is a much better solution. Whether this language is alluding to any kind of partnership, and again, I only mention that because it's conversations with stakeholders across the industry, which is interesting. I'm sure it was a busy day for the board on Saturday, and Novo has come back to HIMS before after threatening a lawsuit, which never happened. That could be possible, but I wouldn't ride on it. And until then, we've got a lot of information for the Q4. It may be that they launch more product categories coming in the Q4. It may be that they launched or at least announced this cancer testing partnership with Grail before the Q4 because they've got more to announce in Q4. Either way, the management team was smart enough not to make GLP-1s their business, as the market thinks it is right now, barely mention them in the Q3, and since then, launch some new wonderful products. Not have its advert mention GLP-1. And I can really see the direction this is going in preventive care to add more value to customers. So those are my thoughts. I am very, very, very content being a HIMS shareholder. I see these price declines as opportunities, although I already have a lot of money in the stock and I'm holding for the long term. And of course, this kind of thesis is not without its risk, but I can see down the line HIMS having such potential to build something truly magical. And in my opinion, GLP-1s are just a blip on a very long and exciting road. Thank you for listening, and expect some more videos coming very soon.